When we talk about the health of the Great Lakes, a big concern is a man-made environmental disaster on the lakes involving contaminants. Focus has really been put on the pipeline that runs under the Straits of Mackinac at Lakes Michigan and Huron. It's owned by Enbridge and moves 23 million gallons of crude oil and petroleum a day. Now, this month, crews are working to secure that Line 5 pipeline to the lake bottom in accordance to a request from Michigan's Attorney General. And there's also been a lot of conversation about freighters and shipping that and what should happen if there is some kind of disaster on the Great Lakes. Are we prepared to clean it up? Joining me now to talk about that is Andy Buchsbaum. He's the Regional Executive Director of the National Wildlife Federation. Andy, it's always good to see you.
It's good to see you, Christy.
And Jerry Popiel, he is the Management and Preparedness Advisor for the 9th U.S. Coast Guard District. Jerry, welcome to Great Lakes Now.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
All right, so let's get into this discussion because this has been in the headlines for the last year and talking about the pipeline, specifically in the Straits of Mackinac. Andy, I want to start with you. What are the major concerns that we've seen over the last month or so?
Well, we know that there's, as you said, this pipeline carries 23 million gallons a day. It's 61 years old. It's never been replaced. We just had a study that came out that looked at what would happen if there were a rupture. And the scientist that performed the study was originally from the government, the federal government, NOAA. And he concluded this would be the worst place in the Great Lakes to have a spill that would be virtually impossible to contain. And that it would go as far, it would go literally, 50 miles either direction, very difficult to predict because of the way the currents run. So we can't be in a mode of cleanup. We have to be in a mode of prevention. We can't let this spill happen, which means we need that pipeline rerouted or replaced.
So, Jerry, when Andy says virtually impossible to contain and an ever-shifting, climate, or how do we actually clean this up? What is the plan in place should something like that happen?
Okay, there are area contingency plans set up for every area of the Great Lakes, and this is one of them. And it really varies depending on what the product is spilled, how much of it is, what the weather is like, and what the currents are doing through the straits or any other location. So our plans take all that into consideration. At the end of the day, whatever happens the day of an incident, that's going to drive the response. The good thing is that a lot of what's part of the response system is not going to change day to day. The people who are running it, the equipment that we're going to bring in, those things, we practice those all the time. As a matter of fact, for the pipeline, we're having an exercise next week, an industry-led Straits of Mackinac pipeline exercise to do exactly that. So,
is it a possibility, Andy, to reroute that? Enbridge has had that for a number of years, and they show no signs that they're going to try to reroute any of that.
Well, reroute or replace. And the reason we're saying one or the other is because we don't have the data yet to know whether that's possible. There are other pipelines that go through the Great Lakes region. There are other options for transporting the oil. There's other places. In fact, there's places where we can possibly reduce our dependence on oil. The difficulty is that Enbridge has been pretty closed with the information. No one really knows whether rerouting yet is possible, which is why we also have replace in there. We do know that it's possible to replace that line. It's got to be done the right way. It's not going to be cheap, but on the other hand, the entire Great Lakes, the brand of our region is at stake. So this is not just an environmental or ecological or recreational or even drinking water threat. This is a threat to the entire quality of life for our region. It sounds like doomsday, it sounds like apocryphal, but think about what would happen to the brand of the Great Lakes if we had an oil spill the size of the Deepwater Horizon, for example. It would be a catastrophe that it would take decades to recover from. We didn't see that one coming. We know this is there. We know it's 61 years old. We know this one is coming sooner or later. Let's do something about it now.
We're coming off a 4-year anniversary of the spill in Kalamazoo. And I think, Jerry, when people think about an oil spill, they think about things that rise to the top. But you're also prepared to deal with things that are heavy oils that sink down into the bottom. Explain that.
That's correct. There's a number of different products that we call heavy oils. One of them is called dilbit, a diluted bitumen, and that was the subject of the Kalamazoo spill. It's different in that it has diluent added to it to make it flow in the pipeline. When that's spilled, it'll float for a while because of that diluent, but as it weathers off due to evaporation and things, the diluent goes up in the air and that heavier product sinks. In the Kalamazoo instance, they recovered a lot of it before it sank, but then what sunk provided a lot more challenges.
So when you say a lot more challenges, what do you have to do?
Okay, so typically the response strategies for a floating oil involve booming it off and then either using sorbents or vacuuming or skimmers to take it off the surface of the water. And that's there's a state of industry for that. Removing oil from the bottom, I would say the state of the industry is not as robust. There are some technologies, a lot of things that were tried at Dam Bridge at Kalamazoo. Some worked, some didn't. And then in a deep water, like in a Straits of Mackinac or Lake Superior incident, the technology in that kind of environment really hasn't been tested nearly as much.
Okay, we're talking about pipeline, Andy, but we're also looking at freighters who are moving a lot of this through the Great Lakes region. What are some of the concerns there?
Well, an oil spill, like an Exxon Valdez type running aground, sinking. Their Lake Superior is a tough lake. It's like an ocean, and bad things happen. And a park ranger once told me there were 100,000 shipwrecks since the beginning. They've been keeping records in Lake Superior alone. That's not the kind of place you want to risk something sinking, a freighter running aground, a rupture. So there are risks for any form of oil transport. But when you're talking about oil, putting a tanker in Duluth and shipping it all over the Great Lakes, the risks increase astronomically. So again, that's why when we talk about pipelines, it's hard to say just stop it entirely, because then you force into other modes of transportation that could be as risky. So that's why we have to make sure that whatever we're doing now is safe to prevent any rupture from occurring, pipelines or anything else.
I think we're seeing a lot more awareness from the public in terms of what's happening on our waterways. And Jerry, I'm going to let you get the last word on this. Are we finally getting a lot of cooperation from a lot of different agencies in look, if something does happen, how prepared are we, and do we have the proper tools to be able to address it and address it quickly?
Absolutely. We like to say that oil spill response is a team sport that really cuts across all levels, from federal down to state, local, tribal, across industry. So absolutely, it's the cooperation is critical, both in the planning and preparedness for looking ahead to incidents when they happen, and then in the response phase when they actually do happen. The cooperation amongst everyone is critical.
Jerry Popiel, Andy Buchsbaum, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.